Hello, welcome, please come in. Our journeys on the heavier side of Souls games are now completed, and it's time to dive into the summary section. I've completed runs through a handful of games, all in heavy equip load, and that experience has been interesting. I'm very much in the light roll, fast weapon school of Dark Souls, so being in chunky armor, with chunky weapons and chunky shield was definitely an experience. And I also feel like the games selected by my patrons over on Patreon were a really good mix of the ways heavy equip load works, and has changed over the years. So, while Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 3 didn't make an appearance in this series, I am curious how those games handle. If you've done something similar in DS1 or DS3, leave a comment with your thoughts. I'd be very interested to hear how those games compare to the ones I played here. But that's about enough preamble, let's dive into the actual comparison. And I'll be starting as ever with difficulty, and starting with the first game I played, Demon Souls. And Demon Souls gets to be slotted right into first place. It's always surprising when Demon Souls earns the top difficulty slot. Demon Souls is probably the easiest of the FromSoft catalog when played casually, but it can also be the most restrictive when doing a challenge run, as this game just doesn't have the bevy of options later games would. And to start off, part of this is that this game doesn't have any sort of poise system at all. It's the reason you can slash away at King Allant with a dagger for a while, and he just lets you do that. But it also means that enemy attacks will often knock you around regardless of your heavy armor and your big shield. And while the big shield, big sword combo is mostly quite effective against random enemies, the bosses are really difficult to deal with. Particularly the Flame Lurker and Maneater, who are both aggressive and physically strong. Blocking these bosses was not particularly useful in many cases. Also, did I do something wrong with my character build? I had a big weapon, high strength, and light weapon, and my damage was fine. Like, it wasn't awful, but I was expecting all that investment into the damage numbers to have some good returns. And they definitely didn't. Maybe I'm just spoiled by shooting lasers at enemies in this game, but big sword should translate to big damage, and it sure didn't. And that's kind of another reason this run gets the highest difficulty. Heavy weapon and big shield are very tempting when equip weight isn't a concern, but realistically I should have just equipped heavy armor and cast spells like a proper battle mage. And I stand by my decision not to do that, because I have my sorcery only run right there. And doing that again, but in heavy armor, probably wouldn't have been that interesting. But it would have been easier. I suppose it wasn't all bad though. The Demon God was easier than normal, mostly because I could one-shot the pillars blocking the path. And the Phalanx Demon was a nice takeout with flame resin and big swings, but that's really it. Every other boss would be easier to take out with spells. And the Penetrator, I had to take out with spells. I know it's not a hot take to say magic OP in Demon Souls, but it really is. And all the tools later games will give me to make heavy armor and big shield viable just don't exist here. Oh, and I bought but forgot to actually ever use warding, which also wasn't great. And now it's on to Dark Souls 2, and that gets to slide right into last place. Dark Souls 2 is absolutely the easiest of these runs. It's honestly not even close. Other than right at the beginning, where even affording equipment to get into heavy equip load was a bit of a problem. Other than that, this was just a straight up cakewalk. I could really just take the first paragraph of the Demon Soul section and invert every sentence, and that would be an accurate summary of every aspect of this game that worked. And let's start with poise, a hidden-ish mechanic where heavy armor can stop you from being knocked out of your actions, which is absolutely essential. Basically, as soon as I could take one hit without getting knocked over, particularly for healing animations, the game really shifted. The Pursuer boss fight was just a showcase of how impactful it is to be able to take a hit and not only stay standing, but also complete the action. And then the shields. Oh, tower shields in this game, why are you so broken? This game had a very nice selection of big ol' shields that could block all manner of attacks. And when that meant attacks just flailing ineffectually or actually bouncing back, that was nice. It wasn't all smooth sailing though. Any boss that was big enough to actually get through my shield was a big pain in the butt. Smelter Demon in particularly was a huge roadblock until I just decided to go around it. Seriously, passive area damage and big enough attack to break through my shield? Not cool. But that maybe impacted a handful of this game's too many bosses. I think the only other real issue I ran into at all was this game's aiming. Using quick sweeping weapons meant I never really noticed this before, but why would I attack sideways instead of at the enemy I am locked onto? That's just baffling. It made the otherwise very good Pursuer Greatsword complete trash. So glad the true Greatsword has a sweeping attack, because this aiming nonsense was a real pain, and it was very nice to just completely bypass it. I know a challenge run is going to rank real low on difficulty when I complete the run and have to think, this would actually be a pretty good build to recommend to a player struggling in this game. I mean, I would probably drop some armor to get back into medium role, but other than that, big sword, big shield, fun time. And then it was Elden Ring, which obviously gets to slide into the middle position, which comes down to a few factors. I could summarize this mostly by just saying it really is a midpoint between the two other games. Poise is still a thing, and big shields do still have a lot of guard boost to block attacks, and Scholar Shield can take what are already very good shields and make them stupidly effective at blocking attacks. That combined with a very versatile weapon Ash system and a wider variety of spells is definitely an improvement. But then, this is Elden Ring, and the bosses don't skimp on the attacks. So while offensive and defensive tools abound in this game, the bosses also have just so much nonsense. And the inability to roll effectively makes an even bigger difference in a game like Elden Ring that is so much faster than its predecessors. That lack of mobility could be countered in some fashion by jumping on Torrent, but that only meaningfully impacted a few fights. The rest were just kind of a pain. And yes, I know I could have easily just equipped Quick Step to dodge more or less normally, but that feels like it would have been kind of like cheating the challenge. Also, I have tried to use Quick Step in casual play in the past, and something about dodging with L2 fully breaks my ability to play the game. So I honestly would have just played worse. So, heavy rolls it was. And there were a lot of bosses that did not particularly care for my nonsense. Malekith, Fire Giant, Gideon, even Renala was a surprise challenger for this build. Really any boss that required a lot of mobility or quick attacks was a big pain to deal with. But at the end of the day, this game definitely gave enough tools to overcome that challenge. Scholar Shield, a wide variety of big weapons, I ignored in favor of the biggest sword, for the most part, and a nice selection of talismans really does a lot to make these very hard fights much easier. So while it definitely wasn't as easy as Dark Souls 2, it also wasn't quite as difficult as Demon Souls. And it's time to start going over recommendations, starting with Demon Souls. Of the three games, how would I rank Demon Souls? Last, yeah. Demon Souls always gets a bit of a rough comparison in these runs. Despite the very pretty graphics in the remaster, the underlying game is a bit dated. And it is by no means a bad game, but it has a lot fewer build options and some key mechanics that really need to be there to make the run as fun as it could be. Heavy armor and a shield feels less like a viable build strategy and more like a liability. And while using magic can up your damage and your defense, never going to recover from buying warding and then forgetting about it, you do really just need to be able to effectively roll to dodge or avoid many attacks. I really wish Demon Souls had any sort of poise mechanic. Some method to make your character less staggerable would have done a lot to make this run better. Because as is, this impenetrable wall of iron I'm carrying around does not feel very effective. Which could be fine in a game like Bloodborne, where they actively mock you for trying to use a shield, but that's not really how Demon Souls treats its shields, and this just feels like a waste of time. So when I can't roll effectively, having the shield is better than not having a shield, but not by much. And on the offensive side, it's really hard to justify big, chunky weapons when it doesn't actually deal that much damage. A part of that was that upgrading weapons is kind of tedious in this game, but even once I did get my sword to +10, I was distinctly underwhelmed by the performance. So yeah, I'd go ahead and skip this challenge in this game. There are definitely other challenges you can do in Demon Souls that are actually fun and interesting, I think. What did I rank Demon Souls in my other series? Then time to examine Dark Souls 2, which gets to slide straight into the middle position. Dark Souls 2 has a lot going for it in this run. It's light and mostly breezy, and it's the first game I played with proper poise mechanics, and shields that do anything meaningful. But that is actually a bit of a problem with why Dark Souls 2 fails to reach the top slot. It's a bit too easy most of the time. Don't get me wrong, I'm fine with my challenges that don't fill me with undying rage, but for this to be a challenge, it should actually be challenging. And there were points... yeah, definitely more than one occasion. Smelter Demon's passive damage and big attacks, Mirror Knight's big shield blocking my attacks, And, yeah, see, so that's kind of the problem. This was just too easy. Big Shield is just such a dominant strategy in this game. Yes, I would have preferred to be in light equip mode so I could properly dodge, but with how incredibly strong Big Shields are in this game, that was mostly not that necessary. Other than the occasional grab attack or the particularly big slam, almost everything could be blocked by a shield. And that's not even counting the literal strong magic shield sorcery, which I didn't use because I couldn't be bothered to get my intelligence high enough to use it. Particularly not with how strength and endurance heavy this build was, but that didn't really matter. Big sword, big shield is such a dominant strategy in this game. Whether I was doing a challenge run or not, that's just the most effective way to deal with most of the game. And while a romp through Drang Lake can be fun, it really shouldn't be that easy. And that ease of play is what really keeps DS2 from taking the top slot. Big sword, big shield was fun. I do recommend you try out this playstyle if you have not yet. But is this a challenge run? Not really. All that leaves is Elden Ring, most recent game and the top slot on this list. Which shouldn't really be that surprising to anyone. Elden Ring just does so much right, as it always does. Big shields are very strong, very able to block attacks, even with many bosses, but unlike DS2, it's not a complete game breaker. There are still actual challenges that you have to work through. Renala, Gideon, Fire Giant, Malekith all have strong attacks or spells that make Big Shield not a brainless playthrough, even up through the end of the game. As usual, Elden Ring provides a huge array of weapons, Ashes of War, and support options that could obviously break everything if you wanted to go through the effort of collecting them all, which I did not, both because I didn't want to and it wouldn't have been that interesting. So that is one knock against the game. If you get into it, really into it, you can gather up all the different spell buffs and boons and probably one-shot most of the game, which would both be kind of tedious running all over the map and then not actually that difficult to execute. Maybe difficult to plan, maybe not. But I can't be bothered to do all that work. I prefer to fly by the seat of my pants off of vibes alone, and then forget I picked up Flame Grant Me Strength in hour 2 and never use it. So I can see a world where Elden Ring would score lower on this ranking because it can, in fact, get broken real fast. So if you're thinking about doing this yourself, keep that in mind. That being said, for me, based on the run I did, I think Elden Ring does secure the top spot. It was a fun run with some fun nonsense in a game that is, on the whole, pretty good. And that is heavy equip load playthroughs of several Souls games completed and then compared. And it was a mostly smooth ride, which is about what I expected. Despite the comparative ease of the runs, it was a lot of fun to do. A nice palate cleanser of Souls nonsense before I hop into other things. I did want to shout out that I do have a Patreon, linked in the description. I spend a lot of time making these videos, so if you enjoyed the video, want to support the channel, and are financially stable enough to do so, that exists. No pressure though, this channel is free to enjoy for everyone and will remain that way. For now, if you like this video, be sure to hit the like button. If you'd like to see more of this, feel free to subscribe. Hey, maybe leave a comment if you have something you'd like to say. But whatever you decide to do, have a safe trip home.